Gotout TV.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sagmeister versus Walsh.
When I started out, I didn't take beauty seriously at all. I thought it was sort of superfluous, and through experience and through really dealing with the subject, I think that I found and now think that beauty is at the very center of what it means to be human, and that it's actually very important, and that we can feel it even unconsciously, and that it drives us. And so I am, and so many designers, specifically high-end designers, are not interested in beauty at all, or beauty in contemporary art doesn't play almost any role. And I think that's a big mistake. I actually think that beauty is at the center of what it means to be human. I grew up as the youngest boy of a family of six kids. Was the only one among us six who was interested in doing something within the arts. But I did grow up in an apartment that had a lot of signs, hand-painted signs hanging around, because my granddad made a full education as a sign painter. This was in the late 19th century when sign painting was basically the job that ultimately would become graphic design. Graphic design is a job that only really existed from the beginning of the 20th century. Most people sort of place Toulouse-Lautrec in Paris at the very, very beginning of what you could possibly call graphic design. I think that was definitely an influence on me, and ultimately when I was 14 and 15, I started to play in bands, and I got interested in writing for a very small local publication, and there just enjoyed creating drawings and headlines and ultimately doing the layouts better than I did the writing. And because that magazine also did a lot of cultural things, like organizing concerts and festivals, and all of these things needed some sort of graphics, and since I was the only one there who was interested in it, I created those two. That made me study graphic design, and then I studied in Vienna and then in New York, and I always freelanced, did projects that interested me while I was studying, worked for a little bit while after that in Asia, and then ultimately in 1993 opened the studio Sagmeister Inc. that became Sagmeister and Walsh 3 years ago. Hong Kong, at the time, this was in 1991, was an extremely fast-paced, fast-moving city. And I started a design company under the umbrella of the largest advertising agency there. So a lot of the work that we did was very commercial. And we did an incredible amount of work in very little time. So from many points of view, it was a fantastic learning environment. Not so much about learning all the things that I wanted to do again, but also a lot about things that I never wanted to do again in my life. And being able to go through that in the relatively short time of 2 years, I think was very, very helpful. And it influenced many of my later decisions, like keeping the studio small instead of large, instead of growing it. All was heavily influenced my experience in Hong Kong. the most clearest direct mentor I had was a man called Tibor Kalman, who used to run a company in New York called Emmon Company, and whom I worked for not a very long time, but he was my boss just in the time before I opened my own studio. And many of the directions that Tibor held dear were similar to mine, or I got influenced by them. In many ways, I would think that he probably, from a design perspective, was a very clear influence. Then I had a brother-in-law who I made my first trip with to the United States, who was very influential on me, who was a very courageous, gutsy human being, and would have a very wonderful way to ignore authority and find his own way. And so the whole idea of sabbaticals was also influenced by him. Almost every project that we go through has up and downs. These up and downs are more extended at times, but they all have it. Very rarely a project just flushes through, very rarely. In general, if they're worthwhile, they have up and downs. And I think that since it is then of course helpful to know that what one is doing, at least at one time, one was convinced that this was the right thing to do. If I take on a job that I already think is not worthwhile, then I have to question my entire direction every single time a down comes. And I had times like that in Hong Kong. I'm not really anxious about my career.
You've got to come back for our second challenge. Don't you go anywhere. Sagmeister versus Walsh continues in just a moment.
Cutout TV.